Today we're looking at Canon metering to get proper exposure. We're going to dive into it on the camera here. I have it set up recording to the computer. A little scene back there. Got some notes, so I might be looking around a little bit, but I'm going to walk you through the process. So the metering is deciding if you're over or underexposed based on 16% gray, just to give you a little backstory on that there. And we have a few different metering options, similar across all Canon cameras really. So let's go ahead and dive into this. On the Canon R8, this is the third tab. At the bottom here, metering mode, you can see we've got evaluative, partial metering, spot metering, and center weighted average. And what that's going to do, you see that little bar moving around down there? It's taking the readings to let you know whether your camera is over or underexposed based on the mode you choose. This first mode, evaluative metering, it is an average taken from pretty much the whole sensor cut up in the little boxes, and it'll do its math, take an average, and based on that 16% gray, tell you whether you are over or underexposed. So when that square is in line with the arrow right there, you supposedly have perfect exposure, but that's going to vary on which of these metering modes you choose. And here at the end, I'm going to show you an even better method because honestly, I don't even look at that bar anymore. With these new mirrorless cameras and with the histogram, it's just, I don't really see the reason, but here we go. So evaluative metering, taking an average across the whole scene. Partial metering, this is looking at the center of your sensor. On the viewfinder, let me show you this. If you choose partial metering, you see that circle there? That's where it's taking your reading from. It is based off the center of the sensor. It's looking at where you have the camera pointed in the middle and taking a reading of the light and shooting for that 16% gray. And this is about 6 to 8% of your entire sensor where it's taking that reading from. If we go to the next one, spot metering. See that circle got a little smaller. We're now looking at about 1.5 to 3% depending on the camera, and that's where it's taking the readings from that sensor to get you to that 16% gray. So now if we come to the last one, our circle's gone. This is very similar to evaluative metering, but it is doing two things. It's taking an average of the whole sensor and it's assigning those points to a center weighted value. So kind of where that first circle was, it's going to give more weight to those areas. So it's going to adjust your average, giving a center weighted average. So all in all, pretty simple, not really hard to understand how you're gaining your exposure there. Let me just show you guys. Let's go back to our partial metering. If you see we moved over there, the Darth Vader, he's black. It is telling us that we are about 2.5 stops underexposed. So because it's taking that measurement off the center, you can see if we adjust it to say it's properly exposed, everything else is blown out. Let's take a picture here. And you can see all those flashing areas are completely overexposed. I have my highlight alert turned on. I'll show you how to do that here in a little bit. So center weighted spot metering, they have specific uses. Sunrise, sunset, something backlit, a bird in a tree, you got the sky behind it. You want to expose for the bird. You don't care so much about the blown out highlights behind it. That's when they say you'd use either partial or spot metering. To me, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. I mean, because it's taking all these readings from the center, composition, how often do you put your subject smack in the middle of the frame? Usually it's on a 1/3 line, so I don't use these a lot. Don't use center weighted a lot because once again, it's looking at the center of the sensor. Now, some of your higher end cameras during spot metering will use active focus points. So it'll actually look at where your autofocus point has snapped to and taking a reading from there. Most cameras don't do that. If I had that feature, I'd sure give it a shot. with things such as birds in flight and stuff like that, where really the critter is the most important, and it could then be anywhere in the frame. Maybe at a racetrack or something like that too. You really want your perfect exposure right on the car, bike, bird, bear, whatever, but evaluative metering is what most people use most of the time these days, I believe, especially with the new camera sensors. So now that we know all that, we know our evaluative, partial, spot, center weighted. What do I suggest you do? Evaluative. But using evaluative, how do you get the proper exposure? There's a couple things that are going to help you out there. If you come over here and press info on your camera, it should bring up a histogram. If it doesn't, you're going to need to go into your settings on here. Where is it? On here it is on tab 9, shooting info display, screen info settings, and you can toggle what you want on and off. I use the histogram more than anything. The other thing we're going to use on these newer cameras, being that they are mirrorless, is the viewfinder. They're electric viewfinders. They show you pretty much what you're taking a picture of. If it's too dark, if it's too bright. And then the last thing I'm going to use is my highlight alert, just to review my images and see if things are blown out. So for that, I'm going to come over here to the play button, tab 4 on a Canon R8, highlight alert, and enable it. And then when you press play on your picture, you'll have little blinkies telling you if something was blown out. So how does this all work? Our histogram is basically just like that exposure meter on the bottom, except for with a lot more information. So looking at your histogram, the right of the histogram is your brightest part of the image, and the left is your darkest. And as you change your exposure, your shutter speed, your aperture, your ISO, it is reflected right there in the histogram. So use the histogram, use your eye because you're looking at the image. But basically, in most scenarios, I want to get it as bright as I can without blowing out any pixels. So what happens if we ignore the histogram and we just go by this meter? All right, that says perfect exposure. Snap a picture, play it back. We can see we have blown out highlights all over the place. So metering our image, I think the best tool to use is the histogram. And I don't really use that meter on the bottom of your camera anymore. And your own eye, you got an electric viewfinder. It's showing you how bright or dark the image is. And the playback alert button, take a picture. If you play it back and it's got the blinkies, then obviously you're overexposed. And with the histogram, I know if I'm blowing out highlights or if I'm going too dark and I'm crushing the blacks, because all the information's right there. So really that's it, guys. You can play with the metering however you want. I think evaluative works the best. If you're setting up a composition where you got something right in the middle of the frame that you want perfect exposure on, feel free to use center weighted, partial, or spot. But really I think the histogram, the electric viewfinder, that's where it's at to make sure you're measuring proper exposure. I don't even really use the exposure meter anymore. I find it misses more than it hits.